In this video, we're going to talk about how we classify living things. As you know, there's all kinds of different living things. Some of them are plants, animals, fungi, and so on. And there's so many of them, we need to be able to classify them to be able to make sense of the world around us. So every living thing is placed in a hierarchy with other living things. And there's 7 levels, and these levels are called taxa. And the taxa are as follows: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So they go in that order. And every level of the hierarchy contains members with similar traits. So kingdom has the most similar traits, and then the phylum are more subdivided, and so on, until eventually you only have one type of organism in the species level. There is a way of remembering the classification order using a mnemonic. So I like to use this one. So King Philip came over for green soup. Doesn't really make sense, but it helps me remember the order of the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So how we classify things, there's actually 3 domains: eubacteria, archaebacteria, and eukarya. That's where we fit in, and a lot of the things that you would think of as being living things fit into the eukarya section. And then there are 5 to 6 kingdoms depending on your source. So the way the system works is you start at the species level and you work backwards. And as you do that, each category will become more and more broad. For example, leopards are different from domestic cats at the genus and species level, but they belong to the same family. So we use a system known as binomial nomenclature to give every species their scientific name. It's given a 2-part name: the genus name followed by the species name. So for example, the domestic cat is known as Felis catus, and the word for the genus is capitalized, and the word for the species is lowercase. And both the words are italicized if you're typing them, or they're underlined if you're writing them by hand, because we can't write in italics. So if we explore some of the main properties of the different kingdoms, first of all, there's eubacteria. So that's bacteria and cyanobacteria. These organisms are prokaryotic. They have no true nucleus. They can be autotrophic or heterotrophic, meaning they can make their own food or they have to find their food from other sources. They have cell walls. You can find bacteria everywhere. And if you were looking at it beyond the domain, they fit into the kingdom Monera. So here's some examples of different eubacteria. And they're classified, again, based on their different shapes. So they can be spiral right here. This is a spiral one. They can be rod-shaped, and then they can be spherical in shape. Our next kingdom or domain is archaebacteria, and these are bacteria that live in extreme environments. So they're considered extreme halophiles and thermophiles. They're also prokaryotic. All of these ones are heterotrophs, and they live in like extreme environments, as I said. So they could live in a salt lake, so those would be halophiles. Halo means halogen. Salt is from halo, anyway. And the hot springs, so thermophiles. And animal guts, methanogens, so they live on methane. These all have cell walls as well, and they also fit in the kingdom Monera. And here's some examples. So here's some examples of like thermal vents, salt lakes, and so on. The next kingdom are the protists. So they are organisms that live in an aquatic environment, and they can be unicellular or multicellular. They can be autotrophic, and if they're autotrophic, those protists can belong to the algae. Algae belong to the plant-like protists. And then heterotrophic are animal-like protists. They can reproduce either asexually or sexually or both, and they may or may not have a cell wall. So the plant-like protist would, and the animal-like protist would not. And again, here's some examples of some protists. The 2 on the left would be plant-like protists, and the 2 on the right would be animal-like. You can see this one has cilia that would like sweep the food into the organism's mouth. And then this one would be an amoeba, and it actually sends projections of its cytoplasm out to engulf food that way. And the two on the left have chlorophyll, so they are able to photosynthesize and make their own food. The next kingdom is the kingdom fungi. Most of them are multicellular. All of them are heterotrophs. They can't make their own food. They reproduce sexually and asexually. Most of them are terrestrial, and all of them have a cell wall. For a very long time, the fungi kingdom was grouped with plants. And we now know that plants and fungi are very distinct. They're not the same. To be a plant, you have to be able to photosynthesize, whereas fungi, while they anchor themselves, or they appear to anchor themselves in soil and grow out of the ground like a plant, they can't photosynthesize. And their cell walls are made of different materials too. And again, fungi are very vast and varied too. They can actually have multiple years of growth, and you can count their lifespan based on their rings, just like you would count tree rings. They can look like the traditional toadstools and mushrooms. Yeast is a fungus. We use yeast to make our bread and to brew alcohol and so on. So there's lots of different types of fungi. The plant kingdom, all members of this kingdom are multicellular, so they're more complex organisms. They're all autotrophs, so they can make their own food using the sun's energy. They reproduce both sexually and asexually. Some of them can reproduce by vegetative propagation, but they also can reproduce sexually by producing seeds or spores, depending on the type of plant. Most of them are terrestrial, and all of them have a cell wall. And this is just an example of a variety of different types of plants. So we have flowering plants, so strawberries, and these look like daffodils or paperwhites, or some clover. We have some ferns. We have trees. Mosses fall in this category as well. So there's lots of different types of plants, grass, etc. And finally, the animal kingdom. All these organisms are multicellular. They're all heterotrophs. Most of them reproduce sexually. They can be terrestrial and aquatic, and they don't have a cell wall. And as you can see, there's a lot of variety. So insects, reptiles, axolotls, birds, mammals, all kinds of different things. Gastropods, so snails and slugs are animals, octopi, fish, and so on. We'll spend more time talking about these another day, but dichotomous keys are tools that we use to classify organisms, and they'll contain pairs of contrasting descriptions. When you read a description, you'll be directed to another pair of descriptors, and eventually you'll land at the spot where it'll tell you what organism you have identified. This is an example of a dichotomous key where you can classify aliens, and you can talk about the first question is asking if the mouth is open, and they would tell you to go to number 2. If the mouth wasn't open, you would go to number 4, and so on. And eventually you would have all your characteristics.